Welcome, everyone. This is Chippakine, and welcome to the Otherworldly, the Changing Times, Changing Worlds weekly show. I'm actually fairly fangirling because we've gotten David Fickett-Wilbar, who writes
Wilbar.
Wilbar.
It's been mispronounced my entire life.
Okay, well, keep correcting us. We may get it right eventually. Who writes under the name Ceisiwr Serith? Did I mispronounce that one too?
Serith, like hair, Serith.
And he just is. He's so much fun. If you look, and I'll probably put them in again in case, because I'm not quite sure how in the chat. There are three dots down at the bottom there where you can record it and find any links I put in. I have put in links already to his website and to his YouTube. I just found out he had a YouTube page, and he's got lots of very, very cool things in there. And he has written a lot of things. First one I ever read was The Pagan Family, Handing Down the Old Ways.
That was my first book.
When I had kids that I was raising pagans, and that was exciting for me. But then he turned to much more deep things. And tonight he is going to be talking to us about writing rituals, because
and performing.
We do them, and if we're going to be writing rituals, let's do it right. Let's know what's going on. Let's have the things in there that need to be in there, and not put in things that don't need to be, and have everything that's in there be useful.
I'd also like to talk about performance as well. I'm working on a book right now, and the working title is Ritual Theory, Ritual Performance. So I'm talking about both of those things.
And oh yes, and another thing I wanted to mention, even though it's not, he has done a really cool book called Back to the Beginnings, Reinventing Wicca, which he had to publish on Lulu because nobody thought they could make money on it. But it's freaking brilliant. So I'm putting up the link, and you can look at it, because I think it should have been out there, because it and I'm going to try and get him to come back and talk about that book. And we will, I really would be very happy to have a lot more stuff, but let us continue this with, I want to turn it over to him, because he's got some cool things to say.
Okay, well, thank you. Okay, so the whole idea of the book is that ritual is a lot of people study it in the academic world. There's even a Journal of Ritual Studies. It's a very hot topic in anthropology primarily. And so one of my strengths, if I have any, is that I can go into the academic world, and I know how to find things. I know how to understand the way they talk, and I know how to translate that into the sort of language that everybody understands. And so that's what I'm doing, I'm a conduit. So I've been studying the technical stuff, and I'm making sense out of how ritual works, what it is and how it works, and then applying that to how we can actually write our own rituals, and how we can perform rituals that are better than what we've been writing and performing. So that's the goal here. Like I said, I'm working on a book, a couple of years maybe. About 5 years or so ago, I decided to write it, and I figured it would just take me a couple of years, because I've been writing and practicing rituals for 50 years now. Holy crap, right? So I figured, based on my own experiences, I could whip it out in a couple of years. Of course, this is 5 years ago, and I'm finally getting down to actually seriously writing the book and not taking notes anymore. After 3,000 pages of notes, it's time to actually write the bloody thing. So that's what I've been working on now. So I've been reading a lot of this ritual theory stuff. And the interesting thing about ritual theory is that this is a field of studies that does not have a definition of what it studies. There's no universally accepted definition of what a ritual is. It's sort of been going on, I knows it when I sees it point of view. And so there've been arguments over whether is this thing a ritual, is that thing a ritual. People have published things saying, well, I've discovered this particular, like watching football as a ritual, treating it like that. So, there've been lots of definitions of it. And some of them are clearly wrong, because a lot of them will, for instance, will say that it has to be traditional. Well, if it had to be traditional, then what we're doing here is worthless. We're wasting our time. You can't, you have to be able to write a new ritual, or neo-paganism makes no sense. So clearly that's not a legitimate definition. I think that the main guy in ritual theories, who in fact started the Journal of Ritual Studies, is called Ronald Grimes. Brilliant man, writes very clearly, very well. I highly recommend his books. So Ronald Grimes, anything by him is worth reading. And he came up with the definition. Let me find it here. Be nice if I put page 1 on top. His definition is that rites are sequences of action rendered special by virtue of their condensation, elevation, or stylization, which isn't a bad definition. Other people, though, particularly Catherine Bell, whose work is also highly recommended. She wrote a book called Ritual Theory, Ritual Practice, which is a very good book, but if you decide to read it, I must warn you, it literally put me to sleep twice during the first couple chapters. But once you get into it, it's wonderful. But she wrote another book, I got it right here, let me see what it's called. Ritual Perspectives and Dimensions. That's a much easier read and is a good introduction, but still very good. But she came up with this idea of using like a Wittgensteinian family resemblances thing. And that's the idea that instead of saying this is A, saying there are 5 qualities of something, and if you've got 3 of them, then you're A. Any 3. You see that in the DSM-5 actually. Like to be a schizophrenic, there are let's say 10 symptoms, and if you've got 6 of them, then you've got schizophrenia. But it doesn't matter. Maybe you don't have some of them. Maybe you have this one. Another person has that one. It's that same kind of idea. And so she talks about ritualization. That you don't necessarily say this is a ritual, but you say this thing is more ritualized than this other thing. So her ritualization qualities are formalism, traditionalism, invariance, sacral symbolism, and performance. Of course, that again means that neo-pagan rituals aren't really rituals, because we don't have traditional. They're not traditional. They're not invariant. A lot of them aren't formal. Most of them have a sacred symbolism, and they're all performed. But by her definition, pagan rituals wouldn't be very heavily ritualized. So even her and even Grimes, I don't think have really gotten to the meat of it. And I'm just arrogant enough that I've decided to come up with my own definition of ritual. And that this is what I'm going to be working with tonight. Even if you don't accept it as the definition of ritual, it's one that's useful. So I define a ritual as an organized enactment involving actuals which map reciprocally to an ideal. And I add to that 3 characteristics of ritual. They're performative in an operant sense, performative in a linguistic sense, and performative in a dramatic sense. And I'm going to be unpacking those things as well tonight. So that's what I work with for both writing and performing rituals. I do this a lot, by the way. I'm the priest and liturgist of Nemos Oginios, our local grove in Durham, New Hampshire. So if anybody lives near the New Hampshire seacoast, and drop me a line, and we'll invite you to our rituals. So I apply. I'm the main. I mainly write the ritual, but then we sit down and we hash it through, and like the whole organization of the ritual has been changed based on suggestions by others. And so I'm not. I take the blame, but I don't necessarily write everything. In fact, I don't write everything. But I do write a hell of a lot of rituals, sometimes for fun. There are some on my website that I wrote just for fun. So I actually have a nice little organization here thing. So let me find out exactly how I want to start this whole stupid thing. Okay, we can start with the ideal. It can also be ideals, but even with ideals, they generally join together to form a higher level ideal. So we'll just work with the word ideal. An ideal can be a religious one, and that's what you mostly think of when you think ritual. So we're talking about God or the Tao or something like that. It can also be secular, though. When we saw the Nazi rituals, where the folk was the ideal, and the Soviet Union had rituals where the state was the ideal. In fact, they actually had people whose job it was to write rituals that fit in with their ideology to replace the previous religious rituals, which is, I can't imagine a better job. They'd write these rituals and then go out, get people to perform them, and then judge how they work and how get people's reactions to them and rebuild them, for instance. This is one really cool one was it was for young men who were just entering the workforce in a city where the main industry was steel making. Well, iron smelting. So as part of this ritual, they would light a torch from the blast furnace and then use that to light a fire, which was the center of the ritual. And another one, the idea was to emphasize the whole classlessness of the society. So what they did was they built this hall that people would process through to get to the main ritual. And the center section of it was just a straight section. But then on sides, it sloped down different amounts on both sides. So the people on the sides were actually walking further than the people in the middle. So by the time they all came back together, they were all mixed together. They'd actually built the structure to deliberately make people mixed. That's really brilliant. They were good. They were good rituals. So I'll grant them that. And sometimes you get kind of a mixed one. Like I would say that the Japanese tea ceremony is kind of a mixed one, where they're trying to, aesthetics basically becomes the ideal. Love the tea ceremony. I've never been to an actual one, but I've studied it a lot because it's just such a pretty little thing, and it is really good for understanding ritual theory. So the actuals, on the other hand, are just things that are objects, sounds, gestures, words. Even the ritualist is an actual as well. When the ritualist is performing a ritual, they're an actual as well. So the idea is that you organize these actuals in such a way that their organization fits in with the organization of the ideal. And therefore, by performing the actuals, you are performing the ideal. The mapping is just what you think of. It's when you got one thing that corresponds to another thing in a different way. So you've got this actual corresponds to part of the ideal in a particular way, and this one does it in that way. And the organization maps onto the organization of the ideal. It maps reciprocally too. The ideal then maps back onto the actual. And that's one of the points of doing a ritual, that you're getting the ideal to map onto what you're doing. You want to be the ideal. So you do the actuals that correspond to the ideal, and then the ideal maps back onto you. Sometimes we take the ideals, the actuals, and we mess around with them and rearrange them and just basically kind of see what they are. And other times we analyze how the ideal works, and then there's sort of an in-between thing, like the directions. We say that we see the directions as significant. Well, how are they significant? So then we look to develop an ideal system where they're organized in relationship to each other. Now, a lot of times these actuals make their way to ritual for myth. Myths are not enacted ritual, are not story rituals, and rituals are not enacted myths. That was a theory from 150 years ago that's been trashed ever since then. It's not true. There are plenty of myths without rituals, even more plenty of rituals without myths, even more myths without rituals. But there is a certain correspondence there, in that you can get actuals from the myths. They tend to be traditional, but not always, because again, we'd be wasting our time if they had to be traditional. I've run across plenty of theories in which they have to be traditional. Roy Rappaport, who's brilliant, who wrote the best book I've ever read on ritual, let's see here, Ritual and Religion and the Making of Humanity. A difficult book, but absolutely brilliant. Actually, his definition of ritual requires them to be anonymous, to come from down from the past or something like that. And I mean, that's absurd. Not only does it not apply to us, but if you look at the modern Roman Catholic Mass, we know who wrote that. We know exactly who wrote that. And I can't imagine anybody who would deny that the Roman Catholic Mass is a ritual. So I really don't understand how he even justified that. But he had a lot of really good things and came very close to a lot of my ideas on ritual and just sort of veered away. So, which is both good and bad, because I had good because I have great respect for him, bad because I have great respect for him. So, it makes me think that, well, maybe I'm blowing it here. But even new ones are usually made out of traditional elements. Like we see this in Wicca, where like the circle casting ritual in Gardnerian Wicca is almost word for word from the Key of Solomon. I did an analysis of it on my website, and it's almost word for word. And you get other things like that, where like a little piece will be the Roman Catholic Mass. Like I said, it's written newly, but it's organized in a traditional way. So very frequently you get that. One of the good things about tradition things is that it's unifying. You're unifying within the group and unifying with a group before you. And unity is, it's a nice thing, and it makes you feel like you're doing something important. It's psychologically pleasing, which is why you get things like, oh, our rituals go back to the Stone Age. That's why you get the Gardnerian stuff. Our stuff is ancient, when it was made up in the late 40s. But you like that idea. It's a really good idea that it's traditional. Part of that also is that a lot of times the theory is that the people who wrote this ritual were closer to the gods than we are today. So they knew better at what to do. That was the golden age. Things have gotten worse since then. There's also, I think, a very useful thing that I use that I go with a lot in my own rituals. I like to do things there are a lot of traditional as well, and that's that the bugs have been worked out. And, so ritual's been done for 2,000 years. A lot of problems have been found, and as things change slowly, the ritual can change slowly. Although rituals do tend to be very, very traditional. The Romans would celebrate rituals. They had no idea what it was. They used to celebrate a ritual called Perilia on April 23rd, I think it was. And they didn't even know whether Polis was the god or a goddess, or whether it was singular or plural. But they still kept doing it because, by God, they were Romans. They had no idea what god Lupercalia was dedicated to, but we're going to keep doing it because our ancestors did it. So they were fanatical traditionalists. We don't have to be quite that fanatical. And traditionality also links into the idea of rituals mapping onto the ideal, because the idea is that the ideal hasn't changed. So why should the rituals change? Why should the mapping change? Of course, that's not really. They should change because our actuals change. It can be in a very mundane way, like if you have a smoke machine you want to work into your ritual, and that could be pretty cool. In the Mithraic mysteries, there was a deity, the Leontocephalic. It was a deity that had a lion's head, which means Leontocephalic means lion-headed, and he had a snake wrapped around him. Usually had wings, and we have artifacts of him, statues of him, that have a hole in the mouth, and you can tell from the deposits in the mouth that they used to blow fire through this mouth as part of the ritual. So you can use technological things like that are pretty cool, and so some of those are new things. And obviously things like voice amplification, that's a very new thing, and that has a big effect on ritual, because if you've got, there was the Agnachayana ritual that was done in India in the 70s, I think it was, where they had amplification, and usually it was done around this altar that they built, and the people were chanting in there, and if you were like 20 feet away, you couldn't even hear it. So you couldn't take part in it in any way. But with amplification, hundreds of people were essentially taking part in this ritual by listening to it. And that changes the ritual. It changes it from a something done just for really one person to something done for hundreds of people. So a technological change can actually make a change in the ritual and in the ideal even for it. Sometimes they have to be changed for very sociological reasons. So like we're not doing human sacrifices these days. So that sort of things change. It's also linked with repetition, and that a lot of people include repetition as part of it. If it's traditional, it's being repeated, and if it's being repeated, it becomes traditional. So now I want to turn to the idea of formality. That was one of the parts of Grimes and Bell's approach. That can be referred to as markedness. Something is marked if it's different. Like in English of 60 years ago, if you could use the word he to mean both men and women. If you were using it generically, if the person goes there, then he does this, and it could be a woman doing it. But if you said she, it had to be a woman. So she was marked. He was generic, but she was marked. So you find things like that, where a specific thing means this specific thing, and it's not generalized at all. And so a ritual is marked itself because you don't usually act like you do in ritual. So even the fact that you're performing ritual is marked. The people in ritual are marked because they have certain roles that they don't ordinarily perform. All the objects, all the symbols, everything used in a ritual are marked because they have a significance for the period of ritual. So markedness is really part of it. And one of the things that marking does is it focuses and it frames. It says, pay attention. This thing is important. And that's really the main thing about it. In fact, nothing can be a symbol if it's not marked. That's part of what being a symbol is. The way you speak can be marked. Elevated prose. 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation. That's a very elevated kind of prose. I have a dream speech. It's a very elevated form of prose. It uses traditional ways of doing things. You might use particular words. It's spoken in a particular way. Archaic words are very common in this sort of thing, and that feeds into the traditionalism. It's like, well, this was done by the old people, so they knew better than us, and you just get used to them. Like so many Christians using thee and thou in prayers because they've gotten used to it. And the weird thing about that one is that thee and thou used to be the familiar form. So there was the formal form. If they were someone which is superior, you'd say you, and if they were your friend, you'd say thee, and so it was a theological point to say thee. It was to say that God is like a friend. God is your father. Well, actually, the father, our father, it's Abba, which really means daddy. And so to say thee means you're very close. But now it's become so fossilized that when you say thee, you're putting somebody up high. So it's the exact opposite. So sometimes fossilization changes your theology. So you have to be really careful about that. But it does do something using an archaic word. You can also, poetry is marked, obviously. And it's very useful in ritual for a bunch of reasons. First of all, it's beautiful, and the ideal is beautiful. That's one of its main characteristics. And like I said, it is marked. It's also easy to memorize. The rhythm carries you along, and the rhyme might help you remember the last word of the next line, which will help you remember the words before it. So there's a very practical side of that as well. Song is taking it even a step further because now you've got the tune to carry you on. And we all know, we hear a song and we know where we were when we first heard it. Songs help memory really, really well. So when you write a ritual, you write it and you read it over and you edit it. I have never seen anybody give advice on writing that did not say it's not about the writing, it's about the editing. And I can attest to that. I like to say that I'm not a very good writer, but I'm a really good editor. The stuff I put down first is usually crap. And I have known this. I've been writing it thinking this is crap as I write it, but I can fix it. And so I edit it later. So you have to be willing to edit it. One interesting thing about memorizing is that when you memorize something, sometimes you keep making the same mistake over and over again. You keep remembering this one word wrong. If you do that, change it. It means it's the wrong word. If this other word is the natural word, then that's the way the language should work, and you should go ahead and change that. And I've done that many times. The furthest you get as far as marking and using a word is a glossolalia, speaking in tongues. We found that in pagan times. The oracles of Delphi, the priestess would speak in tongues, and then the priest would interpret it. And even his interpretation wasn't always very clear. But what she said was basically babbling, at least, that would come across that way. I don't really recommend doing it unless you're doing it on your own, and it just comes out that way naturally as a form of ecstasy. In a group, it's just going to cause confusion. If you watch these videos of charismatic Pentecostal churches, it's just absolute chaos. A lot of times it's faked too. You can tell by the way they're doing it. A lot of repetition. They tend to use only the sounds that are found in their native tongue, that sort of stuff. So it's I'm not a big fan of that, but you can go ahead and use the archaic language if you want to elevate it. I would recommend not using things that sound a little odd in language, like "we do speak to you." Nobody says that. You say "we speak to you." You don't say "we do speak to you." That's unless it's necessary for a rhythm. I highly recommend against doing that. To me, it just comes across as a little silly. But that's me. You can use another language. We found that in the Latin Mass, and of course the Vedic still use Sanskrit. It has its advantages. It links you to the past. Sometimes it's believed to be the language of the gods. It's believed to be more precise. There's a very mundane, good reason for it. When I was a kid, I was raised Catholic, and this was pre-Vatican II. And we went to Germany because my father was still going to be stationed in Germany, and we were living off base. So we went to a mass off base, and it was except for the sermon, it was the same mass that we celebrated in the States. So everywhere in the world, the exact same thing was being done, and that was really cool. It made you feel like you're actually part of the Catholic, the universal church. So that's cool. It also links you with you got these ancient gods. They were spoken to originally in these languages. They might like that. They hear that language. It's the language they're used to. If you do that, make sure you do it right. The gods might cut you some slack. Just like anybody who if you go to Germany and German isn't perfect, they're going to cut you slack. They've got to be glad that you give it a try. So do the best you can. At the very least, try to pronounce it right. And that can be a little bit of a problem, but you can find things on YouTube, for instance, that will teach you how to speak it, and you'll be able to just listen to it and maybe pick it up that way. That's a strength of mine. So maybe it's harder for other people. I can sound like I understand, like I can speak a language really, really well without knowing a word of what I'm saying. It's just, that's one of my skills. I wish there was the other way around, that it was a bad pronouncer and good at understanding the language. You can just use phrases sometimes. In ADF, we do that a lot. Bishiala, we thank you. Basically amen. We use that a lot. I use a lot of Proto-Indo-European words and phrases in my Proto-Indo-European stuff. Sometimes I go, full. We have a song that we sing in our ritual. I sing it Proto, it's all in Proto-Indo-European. So that can be kind of cool. And it puts you in a certain mood, and it can have a meaning. There's another prayer I do, actually it's in that prayer, Wedda no Som. It translates as lead us together, but Wedda comes from the same root that wedding does, and it means to bring you home as if you're marrying somebody. So, you know, wed de noces is so much more powerful than just bring us together. So sometimes using another language, you can be far more precise. Sometimes in English, you can be far more precise. So, you know, you might want to keep that in mind. It's not just speech that's marked, of course. Actuals can be marked. Any actual can be marked. An archaic tool is used. Swords are very common in ritual. Anything like that, anything that's archaic, it links you with the past in some way, and it's been done forever. So, you know, so that's useful. It can be literally marked. You can have symbols engraved on it. The Gardnerian pentacle is a disc with particular things engraved on it. Without those things engraved on it, it's just a disc. But when you engrave those things on it and consecrate it, it becomes a pentacle, and now you can use it in a certain way. Okay, the idea of it being performative in an operant sense, that means it does something. At least it's intended to. It doesn't necessarily do the things that you wanted it to, because, you know, sometimes things don't work. But the thing about this is we can't manipulate the ideal, but we can manipulate the actual. So by manipulating the actual, if it maps onto the ideal, then we're indirectly manipulating the ideal. And you could say that ritual establishes, maintains, modifies, or manipulates the relationship, the mutual relationship between the actual and the ideal. And that's the operant stuff that's going on. It's also the reciprocity that the ideal is sort of backing out on that. So the ritual does something, and after the ritual, something has changed. It could be something like you're trying to do a healing and the person's healed. It could be like you're worshiping the god, so now you have a changed relationship with them, or a stronger relationship with them, or at least not a weaker one. You've performed that particular act. There's really nothing profound about this particular observation, except to say that it allows you to indirectly work with the ideal that you can't do it. And this is all because of the mapping. The actuals have been mapped onto the ideal, so that therefore by doing something to the one side of the map, we're doing something the other side of the map. Okay, now when it comes to writing the ritual, there's one thing that's the most important thing to remember. In the military, there's this thing that whenever you're planning an operation, the very first thing you do is ask one question: what is the mission? And everything after that is in the service of the mission. So when you're writing a ritual, you ask, what is the mission of this ritual? Are we here to worship? Are we here to heal? Are we here to celebrate? Whatever. Now, you might have more than one mission involved. Like, in order to celebrate, you might be praising, you could be worshiping a deity, but still, in the end, there's the mission. And that's always the question. So when you're writing, keep that in mind. What is the mission? Now, if it's a ritual that somebody else wrote that you perform and you found it in a book or something like that, then you might not know the mission, actually, but it might somehow appeal to you. And so then when you perform it, then you, with any luck, learn to apprehend what that mission is. But if you're writing yourself, start with a friggin' mission. Sometimes you don't want to know the mission, though, like an initiation or a mystery, but somebody knows the mission out there. The person doing the initiation knows the mission, and you're just submitting yourself to it. But believe me, there still is a mission there. It's just that you might not know it at first. However, people are fallible, so rituals will fail, and they're not operant. And this can be for a number of reasons. It could be in the wrong ritual. Let's see what else. It could have been composed wrong, or could it be performed wrong, or it could be performed by the wrong people. For instance, for the first one, the wrong ritual, if you're trying to turn aside a hurricane, a prayer probably isn't going to cut it. It's just the hurricane's just too powerful. It's the wrong ritual, and you might not be able to do ritual at all in that case. Not have an operant one. So that's just pure bad luck. It ain't gonna happen. As far as a ritual that is composed wrong, things might be done in the wrong order. Maybe you need to purify yourself before you call on the deity, because the deity is pure. But if you do it the other way around, the deity's going to get pissed off, and that's just not going to work. So composition might be wrong. As far as performed wrong, you might bumble it. You might have ugly speech when you're supposed to be having beautiful speech. You might trip. I mean, that actually could cause a problem. Maybe it doesn't. Most of the time it doesn't. As long as you recover gracefully, you'll be okay. As far as the wrong person, you can see that in like a Catholic ritual. Your average person in Catholicism can't consecrate a host. It's just they're not qualified to do so. Your average person, unless they get permission from the state, can't marry somebody. It just doesn't work. In some traditions, actually, the intent or the purity of the person performing the ritual is a major factor. And if you aren't prepared for that sort of a thing, you might just not know what you're doing. And then it's just going to get all messed up, and it's just plain not going to work. There are ways to get around this. The Romans and the Vedics, and I'm guessing other people, did what was called a piacular sacrifice. And that was what the people in my grove called the Ceiswr sacrifice. It's to make up for mistakes. We are in our ritual. There's an offering of bread after the main ritual, main sacrifice. Gods and goddesses, holy ancestors, spirits of this place. If anything we've done here has offended you, if anything we've done here has been incomplete, if anything we've done here has not been done in the proper manner, accept this final offering and recompense. And that can, that you're making your apologies, you're making your offering, you're giving a gift. If your ritual is focused towards sacred beings, then that's a good thing. If you're like trying to be in accord with the universe, well, that isn't going to cut it. You just try again another time, and just put it to one side. Okay, that one didn't work. Life goes on. I'll get back to it. So to map onto the ideal, you have to understand the ideal, and this requires things like research. If you're trying to do a Roman ritual, what was their ideal? Or maybe it's or what? Maybe you do it through meditation or through continuing to do the ritual, and by apprehending the ideal better, by apprehending the actuals better. So, it's good to understand the ideal. The mapping is done through symbols, which are the actuals. Now, remember, the ritualist is an actual too. So actually, the ritual becomes a symbol. You can classify symbols, and it's good to classify them, because then you can think when you're making ritual. You might think, okay, I can have this. I want this sort of thing there. So, I can have that kind of symbol, and I can have that kind of symbol. So it gives you an idea of what's available. And Charles Peirce, who was one of the earlier students of semiotics, which is study of symbols. It's also called semiology, but in the US it's mostly called semiotics. Came up with 3 types of symbols. The first is an icon. And an icon is a direct representation of something. Like a photograph is an icon of a thing that's been photographed. An index is like a part of something. Like when you say wheels for a car, or hands for the people who crew a ship. That's an index. You're using part of it for the whole. You may notice that when you say wheels, you're emphasizing the fact that a car moves. And when you're saying hands, you're emphasizing the fact that the people do things. So what you use for your index actually tells you what you think of the thing it's symbolizing. That is the thing about it. Pierce, unfortunately, decided to use the word symbol for a very specific meaning. So I'll give his meaning. If I ever have to use the word again in his meaning, I'll just call it a Piercian symbol. For him, a symbol is something that's arbitrarily connected with something else. A word is the classic example. When I call it the German exploding trees phenomenon. That just because the German word for tree is Baum does not mean that German trees explode. So you have to think of them as being completely random. He left out a few. He didn't really. I don't know if he didn't think it through or just what his story was, but I can think of at least two more. One of them is a token. A token is kind of like an index, except that it's one of the things that is referred to. So in the traditional wedding vow, with this ring I thee wed, with my body I thee worship, with all my worldly goods I thee endow. The ring is a token because it's one of the worldly goods. It's not, it's not an index because it's not like part of the thing that does the operation. It is an actual element of the thing that's being given. So it becomes a token. And the other one, I haven't run across a word for it, but I'd call it an abstraction. This is when you're not arbitrary about your symbol. Like a cup being symbolic of the female. Well, that's not an arbitrary symbol. It links in with like the uterus, for instance, and a sword being a symbol of the male, it's a phallic symbol. So that's not really an index. So it's another kind of symbol. So keeping those kinds of symbols in mind, you can think about that. Like, let's say I'm working in a college dorm and I'm not allowed to have fire. So I set up a red triangle that I have a red triangle on which I have placed a vertical photograph of a fire. So I've got an icon there, but I've also got a symbol, the red and the triangle being symbols. So you can combine these things, and you can ask yourself, can I have a symbol? Can I have an index? And, so it's useful to know these different kinds of symbols. There's rarely only one kind of symbol ritual. In fact, it's best if you use more than one symbol and even one kind of symbol for one thing. It emphasizes it and says, look, this one's really important. Sometimes people won't notice one of the aspects of it and won't know it's a symbol, won't know it's important, but they'll pick up on a different one. So that way there's a much better chance to do that. You engage more senses if you can do that. You can use a sound in a sight. If you look through a lot of ceremonial magical books, you find these tables that Venus is copper and green, and I don't know what the incense would be or whatever. So you use a ritual that uses copper can turn green. So green copper thing in the shape. What's the shape of? I don't know. The number 7 is Venus. I forget what her shape is. Let's use a 7-sided piece of copper. So you're engaging more of your senses, and that engages more of you. And remember, the ritualist is an actual too. So by getting more of these things in themselves, they get more of that actual there. Now, the symbols will interact with each other, and this becomes very complicated because let's say you've got A and you've got B. You've got these two symbols. Well, A has a connection with B, and B has a connection with A, and A, B have a connection together. So you got two things, you got three symbols. Cool. So now you get three symbols. A reacts to B, A reacts to C, B reacts to C. But then C reacts to B, B reacts to A, C reacts to A. All two of them react to each other. All three react to each other. It gets out of hand really fast, but that's a good thing because it means you can really convey a very complex meaning very quickly. Now we turn to linguistic performativity. This is incredibly important, and this is something that you have to keep in mind both in writing and performing rituals. Something is linguistically performative if it does something by saying something. Like if I say the ball is red, I've described the ball. But if I say, I now pronounce you husband and wife, I have made you husband and wife by saying those words. I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. I have done something. That's linguistic performativity. It's also called a speech act, which makes sense. You're acting by speaking. Everything in a ritual is linguistically performative. Not just the words, not just the statements, but the things are ritually performative. That statue is that deity. We use in our rituals, we have sacrifices, and we make a cake out of red velvet cake, which is good because it looks kind of like meat, really. And then we frost it the appropriate color, and we use the particular animal for it. For Luke, we use a white bull. For the sun, we use a golden horse, things like that. In that ritual, that horse is a horse. It's performing. It's performing. It's doing the thing that it is. And that's how it maps onto the ideal, by being what it symbolizes. However, you might have noticed a contradiction there. I said that rituals are made out of symbols, and symbols refer. And now I've just said that rituals are performative, and performatives don't refer. That's true. Thing is, rituals are made out of symbols when you're outside the ritual. When you're talking about the ritual, explaining the ritual, writing the ritual, you're using symbols. When you're inside the ritual, it is what it is. So there's a distinction there, but it's good to keep both of those separate. When you're writing a ritual, you're thinking about symbols. When you're performing a ritual, you're not. You kind of have to get beyond that idea that this is a symbol, and you have to see the thing as the thing. Okay, let me see where I'm going from here. All right, so because something is performative in the linguistic sense, it becomes performative in the dramatic sense. And it's a dramatic sense because, as I said, in my definition, it's enacted. It's like a play. And just like in a play, what's most important is willing suspension of disbelief. And that's the performative linguistics coming in there, that you believe the thing that is. Now, in a practical way, you can use terms and ideas like props and lighting and acoustics and stuff like that. That's a very practical side of the dramatic sense that you have to keep in mind. It also means you write scripts. And Chipican promised on at Facebook that she wouldn't go into rant about memorizing your lines, so I'm going to have to do that. Memorizing your lines is so important. I can't even exaggerate how important this is. If you don't have your lines internalized, you can't feel them. You can't say them easily when you're moving. You can't make gestures holding the script. It makes you look amateurish if there's people from other who aren't members of your group showing that. It makes it look like you don't really care enough. You'll impress the hell out of them if you do it. If you do it from a memorized point of view, it just is so important. And a lot of people say, "Oh, I can't memorize." Well, you can learn. It's a skill. Try it. Practice it. Try to learn a poem a week, and that'll help things out. Well, the way I do it is I take my script and I make my own script from it. I boil it down to an outline with just with things that happen in the words I have to say. Like we start out our rituals with a musical signal, a call to silence, purification, call for inspiration. Inspiration, purification. And then it goes on. So I usually do the musical signal and the call to silence. So I put what the musical signal is in the call to silence, which is always the same. So, but the call, actually calling to people, I don't always do the same thing. So I'll write that in, type the whole thing in red. Everything that I do is I put in blue. Everything I say, I do in red. And if it's not me, I just put the word purification, comma, inspiration, you know, and then I put it into 2 columns, both sides of the paper, and I can usually get the entire ritual down to 2 sides of the paper. And then a nice 8.5 by 11 page folds up into 4 pieces very nicely to fit in your back pocket. And I just carry it everywhere with me. And when I have spare time, I pull it out. I have literally been memorizing a ritual standing in line at Disney World with Thunder Mountain because I've got the time. And I sit there and I memorize it. And another thing about reading a script is you're distancing yourself. You're saying this is a symbol right off the bat. You're making people aware of the fact that this is a word written down on a piece of paper, not something you're speaking yourself. I'm not a big fan of speaking spontaneously, though. And people like, it's from the heart. Yeah, but it's usually crap. I've heard a lot of people speak spontaneously, and they think they did something wonderful, and everybody else there is going, "Oh, please shut up." I'm sorry, this is the way it happens. Those of you who do that. Okay, so we talked about the contradiction between symbols and performative speech, which leads to one of the biggest sin, I think, is in writing a ritual, using the word symbol. You never use the word symbol in a ritual. It rips the whole thing apart. It destroys the whole performativity of it. If you say, with the symbol of water, I purify you, you've now just purified the person of symbolic problems. You've got to purify with the thing itself. If you say symbol, then everybody says, okay, this isn't real. Now, even if it's unconscious, there is a certain lack of that. Other things for dramatic, I'm actually a big fan of Stanislavski's method. People make jokes about, what is my motivation here? But the essence of the method is to do the thing that person would do. You are a priest. What do priests do? So you do what a priest does. And you identify yourself so strong with the priest that the thing you do that a priest would do is a natural thing, and it comes across as natural. It takes practice, but practice works. You can get some of these skills, including memorization, if you take part in community theaters. They're all over the place, and that's a good thing. So since we're running out of time here, let me just give a little bit of ways that things you can do to make you a better performer. Learning to meditate is good, especially ones that are like on an external thing, because what you want to be doing in your rituals, meditating on the things that are going on, like meditating on the fire in front of you and being able to just have fire in your thoughts. And that's a good thing. Moving ones are very good. Tai Chi, dance, gymnastics, because that teaches you to act gracefully. And if the ideal is beautiful, you want to act beautifully. And also it prevents you from stumbling and mumbling and stuff like what I'm doing right now. There are overlaps in that, like yoga, because yoga has to do with positions and holding positions in a kind of a graceful way. And so, that will help you with that. Now, there's the other kind of meditation, just mulling things over, and that's a good thing to do, especially when you're writing it or when you're preparing it to perform it, because then you have to figure out what it's about before you really know what to do. Okay, so since we're just about done here, let me just give a nice little summary here of the things. I have a nice little list here that I apparently have lost of the summary things. Okay, when you're writing a ritual, what is the mission? If you're writing with other people, please do not end up with a ritual that looks like it's written by a committee. People have to be willing to say, okay, you're right, we won't include my thing. there's a tendency to compromise by including everything, and you get some real messed up rituals. I've written with people where that happens. I've written with people where it didn't happen, and it's so much more wonderful when it doesn't happen. We emphasize the linguistic formativity. Remember the dramatic side of it. And I guess that's my summary for today. Read lots of people. Read lots of other rituals too, and go to as many rituals as possible and analyze them. After a while, it gets annoying. You find it difficult to take part in a ritual because you're analyzing it. That might just be me. I know I'm crotchety, and I suppose I should. I don't like saying this is just my opinion too much. Let's have an overall arching. This is my opinion instead of everything I say having that in it. I've been doing this a long time. I think I've learned some things, and I hope some of this is useful. Even if you disagree with it, at least now you know what to disagree with.
Well, do we have a few minutes to ask questions? Because
That's
I
up to
bet there are
you.
some questions.
That's up to you. You're running the thing.
Well, yeah, I will hit the unrecord at the end, but I want to know if there's any questions out there, because, people showed up to listen.
Yeah, I've seen some comments here, so I know there are people out there who disagree with some of the things I say. That's okay.
I am going to be putting on your website again and your YouTube channel, because I think those are very cool.
I also have a YouTube page. I'm sorry, a Facebook page under the same name. I don't update it as often as I should. But
I should memorize. I should mention that this will be put up onto YouTube, and we're going to try and get a copy of this so that David can put it on his YouTube. So that there's the link there for the Otherworldly one, and you can go to David's as soon as we can get it to him.
I saw Linda said that she had troubles writing down my definition of ritual, so we just run through it again. It's an organized enactment of actuals which map reciprocally onto an ideal. And it's performative in an operant sense, performative in a linguistic sense, and performative in a dramatic sense. That's how I define ritual.
Could you put that exact wording into the chat so that if we save the chat, we have it?
I can't. I don't know how to. I don't know what I'd be doing there, but maybe check a pen.
I will see if I can copy it down out of the thing later and get
How about this? How about this? I will put it on my Facebook page tonight. And people can just go to the Facebook page and copy it off of there.
Yeah, I should also invite anybody who's here just to see David, that if you enjoy this and like this kind of thing, certainly look for more of these. We put up the event every week on the Changing Times, Changing Worlds Facebook page. And if you haven't heard of it, Changing Times, Changing Worlds is a conference, happens at the beginning of November every year. We are going back to a hotel this year, whereas we were totally virtual during the epidemic. And it's just marvelous. But I am greedy, and I like to have, especially when I was con chair, I missed too many of the workshops that I lined up. So I started doing the show so that I could actually get the guests to come in and come on to the podcast and share the information. And that's what Otherworldly is it's kind of a broken into bits part of the conference. If you like things that have to do with magic, the occult, other worlds, that's and If you'd like it free every week, that's Otherworldly. And if you'd like to come to the conference, we'd love to have you. And find us on Facebook. Let me know if you want to get the invitations sent to you. Any other questions? Stephen.
I don't so much have a question as a comment. I would just like to say that this has really been a masterclass in that, you know, crystallized a lot of the stuff that I've been vaguely thinking about for years. So, you know, I want to thank you, David, and you, Chipicon, for bringing this to us. It was very useful. It did gel a lot of the stuff that I've been thinking about in terms of ritual. My definition, and this came out of sort of a controversy that's been going on forever in the SCA, where we talk about what we do in the organization as a game and just pure theater, and it doesn't matter, but it really does, because well, my definition is that ritual is theater with consequences. You know, if you're playing Romeo and Juliet, at the end of the play, you take your bows and then you do it for the Wednesday matinee all over again. But nothing has really changed. If you're knighted in the SCA, well, you're a knight next week. And that changes how people interact with you within the context of the organization. So yeah, theater with consequences. And I was very pleased to get that corroboration that you know, my thoughts on the subject weren't totally off the wall. So thank you for that very much.
You know, that was beautiful, and I think a lot of the reason it was so helpful to people, it was so damn well organized that
Wow,
very much so.
that was, you know, well, no, I'm serious. I have sat through a lot of these things. I've given a couple presentations myself, and I was sitting there. If you look at the information density of the last hour and how neatly it was organized with one thing flowing to the next, that helped a lot. The structure of the presentation helped understand the structure of the content. So that may be something to chew on, but yeah, that was good, especially when you actually got down to where you had what I would consider a good academic / technical definition of ritual. It's something I've never heard anybody put together at that level before.
Yeah, I had no idea there were actual books on it.
Oh God, yes. I have on my website, I'm sorry, my YouTube channel, I have 2 videos recommending books, one on theory and one on practice. And I'm going to be making 2 more, one on a second one on theory, and another one on books that aren't specifically ritual, but have a lot to do with ritual, like semiotics and performative linguistic, the mysticism, I don't know what I'd say, kinesthetics, art theory. It includes everything. It's amazing how many fields. You know, I started out studying ritual theory, and all of a sudden, all these other things started coming in. The next thing I know, I'm reading semiotics. And, I'm reading Kaczynski on art theory. I think reading all this, you know, Stanislavski, and it's just amazing how it spreads out.
It really tells you that you landed on a core concept, a key concept, when you find so much other stuff hanging from it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's important. And I'm just so glad that so many other people have done so much work before me that I've been able to draw off of. And there have been quite a few. Yeah, I have a little pile here of the Grimes and Rappaport and Bell. Those are the big ones. There's also a really good book called Elements of Ritual by Deborah Lipp, that's specifically from a Wiccan point of view. And she goes through a classic Gardnerian Wiccan kind of ritual. Each section she has is organized by the 4 elements. And like I think the earth ones, I don't have it with me, it's loaned out right now. The earth one I think is practical stuff, you know, and she like to analyze each section by this. Like for instance, she recommends having it for your altar, having some sort of either bookcase or a like an end table thing with a shelf underneath it, and you put all your extra candles and things like that on that shelf, and then you put a tablecloth over it, and no one can see all that extra stuff, but it's there in case you need it. Like, you know, all the things that you learn over the decades doing rituals. Like, don't ever use a candle outside unless it's in a jar. It's gonna blow out. Things like that. Practical things.
Remember the ritual fire, flame creator, the Bic.
Yes, I especially like the long ones, because you buy these yard site candles, you buy them supermarkets, and they're like about yay tall in glass, and you can reach the long thing down inside to where the wick is. Those are really good because those don't blow out.
Okay, well, this is the end. This is where everybody says thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody for coming, and thank David for coming. I do want you to come back. I am really eager to have you come back and talk about some of the other topics I have now discovered on your website.
Sure, I could talk to you all about light bulbs and the ritual of pink poodle.
But I want to hear more about the revamping Wicca with modern research. Wow, sure. That is there's a book that I put.
It's kind of an Indo-European version of Wicca, is what it is.
Yeah, it's great. Anyway, I'm going to turn off the recording now. Thank you all. And
all right.